Hey, there we go. Cool, cool. That's good. This is a wonderful facility. This is the first time we've been here. It's a wonderful spread. We've got wonderful catering and breakfast and lunches provided as well. We'll have snacks and that throughout the day. So feel free to get your fill. And I think it's about time for our keynote speaker. Right. Jennifer Eustis, she comes to us from the University of Massachusetts, UMass. She has a wealth of experience in going through all sorts of different system migrations. And we are really honored that she has come all the way from New England to share her expertise with us. Jennifer?
Hello, everyone. Wow, it's great to be in person and it's great to see people. Maybe I might do this occasionally just to get into the Zoom frame of reference, maybe not. So my name is Jennifer Eustis. I'm one of the metadata librarians at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Because that's a mouthful, we say UMass Amherst. We are part of, well, actually I am, you aren't, the 5-college consortium, which consists of Amherst College, Hampshire College, Mount Holyoke College, Smith College, and UMass Amherst. We also have 2 centers, the Renaissance Center, as well as the National Yiddish Book Center. So that forms the 5 colleges. We're in Western Massachusetts, the Pioneer Valley. So first off, I want to thank the Notesel board. I guess you're kind of at these 2 tables. I really am very honored to be able to speak to you today and share my experiences, because I'm thankful that my past experience can inform your future experience. So that's a bit of a joke, but really I've been through, yeah, I know, I've been through 3 migrations, which is kind of average, I guess. How many have gone through 1 migration? Okay, 3. Yes, you have survived. Any more than 3? No, all right. I have a colleague who's been through 5. And I think as systems get older, you will be, institutions will be migrating. The title of my presentation is Managing Futures, working towards the future you need. So obviously there's a play here in between the past and future. And I'm going to be focusing on expectations, view through the lens of project management. And my experience is really with Agile. So I worked on Agile teams in digital repositories. So don't ask me about Lean or Waterfall. I'm supposed to be Agile, or at least I've learned to become one. So I want to start out with a story because I want you to get engaged with this. And I need my clicker. Well, maybe not. Well, yes, I will need my clicker later on. It takes place in a galaxy far, far away. So if you haven't guessed, yes, in honor of May 4th, I'm going to be telling the story of Star Wars through the lens of project management. So there are 2 warring organizations. Who are still in Storyland. Yeah, they've made peace. Well, actually, I don't know. The books are still ongoing. So the peace hasn't really been peaceful. If not, I can just use the mouse too. Well, like the Empire, the battery died. But so the, oh, you got it? Okay, thank you. Oh, awesome. There we go. It came back. So we destroyed one, but it came back as maybe the Death Star. So the Empire, its goal was to rule the galaxy, right? I mean, very ambitious goal. Obviously, they didn't succeed. But this was done through the principle of expanding by aggressive expansion using tactics of fear, repression, and control. Obviously, we're dealing with a narrative archetype of evil. So, I mean, these aren't nice people that work for the Empire. There are projects within this overarching plan. So the plan, rule the galaxy. But in order to do that, they had to spin up a number of smaller projects. One such project, as you can see the little Lego, and I do recommend watching the Lego Star Wars on YouTube. It's really funny. But they had to come up with a new military kind of infantry force. I don't know, I guess they also fly. I don't know, maybe they're a new just Army or something, or Navy and Air Force. And that is the stormtrooper. So they had to come up with a plan. What are the stormtroopers going to like? So they had a model, the bounty hunter. I don't remember his name, and I did not see the films for this presentation today. They had a test, can we build the stormtroopers? Can they, do workflows that align to our principles of oppression and fear? They have marching orders. And so this project was actually operationalized. We have stormtroopers throughout the galaxy, like Captain Mayhem, just really inspiring fear in those who live in the galaxy. Another example is the Death Star. And so here you had a plan to actually build it, test it, and then man it. And so we did see in the, what is it, the fourth film? That's the first film of the 70s. Anyway, it wasn't quite complete, but they were rushing to actually test it on the planet, which did succeed. But then, of course, the Rebel Alliance, they had plans of their own, and they were able to destroy it. So, I mean, the good news with this is the Empire doesn't win, and we're very happy. And that's because of the Rebel Alliance. Yes, the foes of the Empire. And here we have little Lego people. They all look the same. They're kind of like stormtroopers, but good people. So their goal was to restore the Republic. Barring that, restoring freedom for all living beings, I guess, in the galaxy. So you can kind of see that these two plans, these goals, are in conflict with each other. Obviously, it makes for an amazing story, right? Well, and of course, there are archetypes of evil and good. But anyway, there's a principle, shared principles within the Rebel Alliance. It's their declaration of rebellion. And it says a lot of things. Short story, freedom or death. I think they were all from New Hampshire. If you don't get that, the license plate has freedom or live free or die. Yeah, there you go. So they're all from New Hampshire, but that was good news because they know how to fight. And so I don't know how this was communicated. I mean, in the fourth film, that was the first film of the 70s, as R2-D2 had a message from Princess Leia, it was intercepted, but it finally got to the right people. So obviously they didn't have official communication channels like the Empire, but they still got the word out about who they were and their branding. So yeah, you've got a brand, even if you're the rebel. So they fought a war of attrition against the Empire. So what this means is really they had different cells. Each cell had a project. So we see this in the film. One cell went out to the only archive in the galaxy. I find that very scary for me. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what's going to happen in a galaxy far, far away. And there are no librarians or archivists there. But anyway, they steal the plans. Yay. So project done, project accomplished. They bring them back to the analysts. They, comb through that. How can we destroy, these Death Stars? They find a way. They come up with a different plan. And then they hand it off to Luke Skywalker and his posse, and they go out and they get the job done. Mission accomplished. So they have migrated to a new universe in the galaxy. So why do this with Star Wars? Obviously, it's a little fun, and it only works to a certain extent. Obviously, this is a story, and I'm not sure you really want to go to war with other organizations about a system migration. I mean, I don't think it's worth it, but people do get touchy about their metadata. Yeah. But what you see here is that you have a plan. That plan consists of smaller project plans. That is essentially a migration to a new ILS. It is a project of managing projects and people. But you have to make sure that what you're doing adheres to some sort of principles. Because if you're just out there having fun, the Rebel Alliance would have never won. I mean, they had to have a goal in mind. Also, you have to have kind of a way to do that. You know, if you don't say anything, no one's going to know what you need to do. Communication is part and parcel of this goal of your project. But what does this have to do with expectations? Because I've talked about project goals, stormtroopers, and sequence of events, and wars, and I guess fear and oppression, which is not very happy, I'm sorry. But it has a lot to do with expectations. And, you know, following on the Star Wars theme, I've divided it into two very crude stakeholder groups. One, those living outside of the governing bodies. So I don't know, maybe it's someone who repairs robots on Tatooine. You know, they're not part of the military complex, industrial complex of the empire. You know, they aren't a rebel. Maybe they live down the road from a rebel cell. Who knows? I mean, you know, maybe it was the only rent affordable place they could find in that galaxy. Who knows? So what are their expectations? They expect to live in fear, all right, especially if they're living under the empire rule, because that's the statement of principle of the empire. And they have stormtroopers and Death Stars and very nasty people running around trying to control you. Hi. You expect to be ruled by the military. Again, this is no secret with the empire. It's aggressive military expansion. They also expect to have their freedoms curtailed. I mean, obviously the Rebel Alliance is trying to fight against that and kind of restore those freedoms to people. So you have freedom of choice. And you could be potentially hunted and living on the run. So, you know, not a good scene. This is mostly from the Empire view. But if you're a rebel, you know, near Rebel Alliance, you could also be mistaken as being part of that cell. I mean, because what? Rebels all look alike? Ooh, bias. Yes, the Empire probably has a lot of bias. So you probably are, you know, in danger that way as well. How do we know this? Well, I mean, the films are really great. And since they're archetypes of evil and good, their actions are really predictable, which is really nice for us. They always act in that way. For example, when Chewie and Han Solo, I think they escaped with Princess Leia, and the person who's in charge of I'm not sure what they were called, Battlestar, the cruiser, he lost them. He was like, oh no. And unfortunately, I get it mixed up with Spaceballs a little bit. So if I do veer into the Spaceballs, you know, all I see is the plaid line now. But Darth Vader comes down and he's like, that is awful. That is wrong. You can't do that. You're in trouble, you know? So all of these actions are predictable. Hence, we can actually form these expectations that are fulfilled, you know, to a very high degree. What about those within the organization? So you are a rebel, or you are, you know, the commander of maybe the Death Star, hopefully not for you. You know, you really want to be on a radio tower as far away from the rebels as you want. What are the expectations for someone within that organization? If you're in the Empire, you expect to instill fear in others. I mean, that is a mandate. That's part of your principles. It's a policy. All of your workflows should be aligned to that. I mean, I guess if you're really into that, I mean, hey, you're having a great time. And, you know, Darth Vader, there are many books on Darth Vader that actually he's going out and, you know, really, you know, doing nasty stuff to people and having fun. You know, I guess he has a change of heart later on. But if you're a rebel, same thing, but not for the same reasons. You want to instill others to have fear in what the empire is doing. So you flip and join the Rebel Alliance. You also have this expectation of working in the shadows. I mean, for the Empire, obviously, it's a bit like 1984. People are spying on each other. We don't really know who the Emperor is in the beginning. We don't know who Darth Vader is in the beginning. And this is really, I mean, that not knowing who these are and what they're really doing, it, you know, heightens that fear factor, obviously. But for the Rebel Alliance, you can't just go out and say, oh, yep, use the official communication. We're going to blow up that radio tower. Ready? Yeah, okay, good. I mean, they'd be arrested. So they have to operate in the shadows, as we saw with the communique that went through R2D2. You know, they kind of stole him away, you know, so he wouldn't be captured by the Empire. The expectation for those working for the Empire is to gain more power. You have to make sure that you further the goal of ruling the galaxy. The Rebel Alliance is to either restore the Republic or restoring freedoms for people in the galaxy, which also means disrupting all operations for the Empire. So that's what's expected of you as someone, at least in the Rebel Alliance. But one that I find actually very interesting is the expectation of failure. And both organizations have that. And it's something that I'm going to come back to because I've encountered it in my, career as a librarian, but also with migrations. In the Empire, failure is not an option. You are made to be an example of. And actually, I've encountered some of this in my own experience as a librarian. And so we have the example where Darth Vader comes, said, you failed your mission to capture those rebels who went away in Plaid. So now there's going to be a nasty, consequence for you. What you learn from this action is you have very good reasons to say, we must succeed at all costs. That's the Empire. And you see they are quite brutal. Well, I mean, they have principles that are quite brutal. The Rebel Alliance, same expectation. There is an expectation of failure because the missions are dangerous. Obviously, you're in a war. It's very dangerous. However, instead of being made an example of, you become an example of courage, of inspiration for others. And unfortunately, there's, the archetypes of good and evil. There is this idea of martyr, which we do not want to go there at all. None of us are martyrs. Work-life balance. But it is a 360. That same expectation is supported by radically different motivations as well as past actions. Bringing it all together, expectations involve past actions as well as future actions that have all of these motivations and predictability to them. And this is really what I'd like to talk to you about today. Expectations in terms of what they are, gathering input, and why tell the story of Star Wars as a past story. This is something that you're also going to have to do in terms of gathering input or information. What's communicated, principles, and organizational culture. So expectations. And all my slides are from like either Flickr or Digital Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So they're actually really fun. Expectations are beliefs or feelings that something will occur in the future. And this is it's more a psychological definition rather than a project management one. It's explaining what people feel when they have expectations. They're quantitative. We have a number of expectations. Just for my story for the Empire and the Rebel Alliance, I listed, how many did I list? Maybe, I don't know, a lot. Yeah, I mean, even in your own life, you have expectations for work. You have a set of expectations for your family. Maybe you have expectations for your drive home that are different. There's a quantity aspect to them. Of course, they're qualitative. You can tell stories about expectations and the expectations that people have. But more importantly, they have intensity. You can have strong expectations, especially if the past actions are very predictable, like in the Star Wars story. And they have direction. Expectations is about something that will occur sometime in the future. So we're dealing with the past, and with that also certain biases that you might have. They come all into play to formulate what we expect in situations and in time. So what's really important when you're thinking about expectations is to think about your past actions. These become really your good reasons for believing in something that will occur later on in the future. And if you don't have that, if things are inconsistent or they don't make sense, then all of a sudden your expectations won't be fulfilled, or you won't even know what's expected of you. And that's when your project really falls apart. And people are like, well, I don't know what's happening. Why am I even here? And that's what you don't want. So how do you do this? How do you get those expectations? First, you have to gather information. Remember, expectations are about the past. I like to see this as gathering the stories or uncovering the narratives in your organization. Everyone tells stories about themselves. They have a story about them at work. So what does this mean? So remember, I started with just 2 stakeholders. Yeah, that's not what you do. You're going to have a lot more stakeholders. So you have to uncover who are the people who are going to be working on your project. You can have people who are making decisions, who are handling the budget, who are maybe influencers or opposition. And I know I talked about opposition in Star Wars. This is not the type of opposition I'm talking about. Opposition is really those who are taking a critical look and deconstructing the project and asking questions. They might be ones who are very good at saying, oh, these are the risks I see. These are the challenges I see. So sometimes I work with someone like this, and she's amazing at deconstructing plans, projects, ideas, but she slows down. Some people see her as slowing down kind of that process. And I'm like, no, we need her because she brings out all of these things that we just didn't think about. So I'm more of an ideas person. I'm like, let's jump into the ocean. And they're like, no, gosh, no, don't do that. So you really need these types of people. Your stakeholder groups might have a variety of these people on them. How many stakeholder groups should you have? That depends on your organization. In the 5 colleges, we did this, obviously there was an implementation team, and then we did it by functional area. So metadata, acquisitions, users, etc. What I haven't put on this slide is the community of users that are affected by your migration. And there's 2. So one is obviously your users. We went from Olive to Folio, the future of libraries is open, and we lost our OPAC. So everyone who had an account in our OPAC, that was going away. So they had to be notified. They also had to be communicated to in terms of what to expect with these changes. Other users were in our library, for example, the Digital Media Lab. So they have a page, they loan all sorts of equipment, and it uses a script that relies on the API to the catalog. With our migration, all of that had to change. So they had to rewrite all of that. Our web page also had to be updated. We no longer had an OPAC. All of the information and that led from there to our discovery had to change. So there's a lot going on. Yeah. So once you have these stakeholder groups, you really want to uncover the narratives. What are the stories that they are telling each other? How often are they telling it to themselves as well as others? And are there any overarching expectations that you can see? So here I have an example. I did some one-on-one and focus groups with people in the 5 colleges. I spoke to a copy cataloger who was there for the past migration. She said that really no one spoke to her. All of a sudden she knew that they were migrating, and then she was told what to do in the new system. So she felt from these past actions that she was pretty much ignored. So her expectation was that basically it would be a redo this time around. So she wouldn't be told about the process, she wouldn't be included. So she was very disengaged. So this is a negative expectations. And this is something that really you want to surface in your investigation of these stakeholders. because you need to flip the negative to the positive. Another example is I spoke to someone who was on the implementation team, and she said that it was difficult to communicate because there was so much going on. So what happened was that they made decisions and they didn't necessarily communicate it or communicate it clearly. So what happened is people, one, didn't know why decisions were being made at a particular moment. And some on the implementation team even forgot how they were making because it wasn't documented. So blame started to be placed on some of the members of the implementation team. So the expectation there for her was, we need to change this. So we need to change how we communicate with everyone on the project, as well as those affected by the project, such as your users and other people in the library. So what you need to do is find out what people are expecting based on what has happened or taken place earlier. And if you can interview those who've already been through a migration, sometimes people are still there. I'm not sure. I was lucky that in the 5 colleges, we did have a lot of people like that. So I was able to interview all of these people. And you want to highlight the negative expectations as well as the positive, because you want to flip, again, that negative to the positive. And this is a really good, I think, diagram of technology adoption. And you see it in project management. And people go through these stages as they adopt to new technology. And you can have, happy or sad. Sometimes you start out with shock or fear. Fear is actually a very common emotion with migrations. How am I going to do my job in the new system? Can I do my job? I have so much knowledge of what I do now. What happens if I lose that? That's very scary for people, because it kind of relates to your job, to, how you're able to make a living, sustain your family. So that fear can be quite pervasive, and you do have to watch out for that. And of course, this takes place over time. But what I find kind of lacking in this is that it's two-dimensional. And I'm so glad you said that people are dimensional, because we are multidimensional. And so we really have to take into account dimensionality with expectations, and even change management and managing people. This is an image of light refraction. So you have the past light coming to the hyperspace of the present, which I kind of goes with the Star Wars theme. That was completely by accident, by the way. So this hyperspace of the present, the observer is at a particular space and time. And I think that's very important, because our moment now is different than it's going to be in the future. You're going to be in a different space and time. So we always have to make sure that we address what's happening in this focal point of space and time. But all of that informs the future. So we see the light going out. In terms of your project and migrating to a new ILS, you really have to flip the top cone onto itself, because you're not just migrating. That would be a horrible scenario. We've just been migrating for 5 years, our data is really super clean now. We don't know when we'll get to the new system. Our RFP went on for 4 years. You don't want that. It's a great experience, but you do want it to be over. It is a project and there is a goal. So remember that expectations is sometime in the future. For your migration project, you don't want sometime in the future. You want a particular point in the future in which you are working in the new ILS. And so expectations have a goal. They have a destination in mind. And I really like this image of the comet, because this comet has, it has comets. As much as comets do, they have a direction. And notice that not all the lights are in the same place. And that's the same with the people that you're going to be working with towards a migration. You're each at different points. You're each have a job that you are supposed to do or help out during the migration. But you form the whole of the comet that's gliding, or I don't know, gliding through space towards its ultimate goal of getting to the new system. But this only works if you communicate it. So the whole process of gathering input has to be done through communication. Knowing your goal, knowing the past stories, you have to communicate with people. So it's very hard to separate them, but they really do go hand in hand. And it's through communication that you can actually set your expectations, as well as make sure that they are reaffirmed and make sure that people know what's going on. But communication is really difficult. It's one of the most difficult things, I think, that I struggle with daily. Because when you're migrating to a new system, you're learning a new language. And if you've ever learned a new language, you know that there's certain ways to refer to things. It was supposed to rain today. Oh, I guess my expectation is not fulfilled. Anyway, so in French, we talk about it's raining ropes. So if I translate that, it doesn't make any sense in English, but it's raining cats and dogs. I guess that's an old phrase. If I say that in French, it doesn't, they'll look at you like, oh, wow, yes, Americans, please go away. It doesn't make any sense. But we are talking about the same idea of it raining heavily. So you have to learn how to say it's raining heavily in the language of your new system. And that takes practice. And that's done through communication. So what you have to do is really balance your communication. Oh, sorry, yes. Oh, here's a slide on that one. And input. This is what input is giving you, all of this information. How are people in your organization feeling about the migration? If there are people there for the last migration, how do they feel about that last migration? You know, while you get information in terms of your RFP process, maybe it's finished, you already know who you're going to, then you get even more information. If you're going to Alma, then you already know, okay, we know some questions to ask now because we know the system we're going to. So throughout this process, you're going to be gathering information on an ongoing way. How do you do this? Whatever's at your disposal, surveys, individual one-on-ones, emails, email lists, blogs, focus groups. In the 5 colleges, I was chair of the record merge working group. So we did a merge and a migration. We got rid of our OPAC. You know, 5 colleges go big or go home, I guess. I don't know. So for the migration or for the merge, this was pre-pandemic. So I brought together all of the stakeholders in a room. I put Post-its all around and I said, what does the merge mean for you? And it's so funny, they kind of went in their own groups, like all the special collections were like, come on, buddies, we're going. Yeah, all the administrators were like, is everyone working? Yeah, that was their role. But they also participated and we got a lot of information. We had 3 of them to really nail down these questions. We started with the big questions, just like a reference interview. We just made it, refined it and refined it again. And we came up with a recommendation based on the input of this community of what their experiences were in terms of their place in the organization, but also if they've been through past migrations or the projects they've done in the organization. Because people really need to know the when, why, how to even begin. Because if you don't have that, then you have no starting point. You're just like doing something for the sake of something. This is a project. It does have a starting point and it has an end point. And people need to know how they're going to be involved. So you communicate that. And as you gather more information, especially maybe on their skills, what they want to contribute in terms of also their past experiences, you can set that out through communication. So here I'm thinking of obviously a project plan, but your communication plan, but also forming those project teams that maybe are functional in spirit. So the 5 colleges, obviously the implementation team, well, the implementation team really wasn't first. The committee that investigated why we needed to migrate came first. So they looked and said, you know, why do we need to move off of Olive? And then they investigated a bunch of systems and came up with a report that they, shared with the entire staff. Well, actually, it was all the staff of all the 5 colleges. So, because we migrated as 5 colleges. That is extremely important. And it's one of the reasons why I like this, because it's a quick guide start, which is open to all the, I guess, if you're in Boston, transforming communications. If you don't have this in a way that's accessible for people, they're going to be lost. Because what you're doing in expectations is gathering all of those actions which are forming the reasons for your expectations. And you want good reasons so that those expectations become fulfilled. So if you set, for example, a milestone and you say, well, that milestone just doesn't matter. We don't need to do that. Then people are like, but we were expecting that milestone. So you really need to make sure that there's a mirroring in between, your actions and what you expect from people. So what does this look like? This is this is in my references at the end. And I think it's a very small college. It's a 2-page read. It's actually it's really good. It's either Kentucky or someplace kind of not south, but in the middle there. This is a high-level view of a migration, kind of the phases you go through. You pick a platform, you have an RFP, you pre-migration phase, you work with the vendor, you figure out implementation and customizations and integrations, and you do some training. It all sounds really easy, right? It's not. The final test, of course, everything works as expected, right? Again, those expectations. And then you launch, you have a party. This is actually a really good high-level view, and I do like it because it gives kind of this, 3,000-foot view of what a migration is. But there's a lot that is implied with that. One of that is the people component and expectations. So I'd like to break this down, just the first two, the platform selection and pre-migration planning, and take a look at how we can see this through input communication as well as setting up expectations. So platform selection. Obviously, you've had a committee that said you have to migrate. So you're looking to a new ILS. You have to gather information. Why are you migrating? It's interesting, at the 5 colleges and at UMass, right after we signed with EBSCO, there are a couple of people like, why are we migrating? Why break the wheel or reinvent the wheel? Everything works. I can do my job in Olive. It doesn't, it's fine. We don't need to change this. The problem was, and what was then communicated, once we learned that information, we then communicated that Olive was at its end of, in fact, I think it's dead now. Yeah, they're no longer maintaining Olive. That was one reason. Another reason was that we self-hosted Olive, and we simply could not do that with central IT and security measures. We just couldn't maintain our own servers. It was becoming more difficult with that. But also, Olive did not meet the needs of what we were doing currently. A good example of this is, like you all, we order memberships, we pay for memberships, our NERL, our NERComp, our BLC. And so in Olive, we had to have an order record that was tied to a MARC record, a bibliographic record. So our acquisitions folks were there going 245, I don't know what indicators mean. And in all caps, it would say neural membership, and then it would have some notes like paid, seat order record, some other things. Sometimes they would forget to suppress it from discovery. Yeah. So you'd be there and you'd be like, oh boy, we did it again, And so you'd suppress it from discovery. People are like, why do you have this in the catalog? It makes no sense. It's just confusing users. And we're like, we know, we're sorry. So yeah, that's one example of how it really didn't fit acquisitions needs in that manner. We call them cover records, and we had thousands of cover records. Another point was that, especially with mixed print and physical, it just it didn't quite work. And then it was dying. So you really have to communicate that. So when someone comes to you and says, it's working just fine, we don't need to migrate. Then you say, oh, wait, here's some reasons. And these become good reasons. And then people are like, because most people are reasonable, they're like, oh, okay, now I understand why we're migrating, why we're going through this process. So you can engage people in that. And so you can expect them to be engaged because you've given them the information to do so. I think it's really important when you think about this to be honest. Don't give them information that you want to be true. Give them the information that you have. That's very important. I would love an ILS system to be everything I think it could be. I have never worked in one where that's the case. There are things that aren't going to work, and even on your way there, it's going to get a little rocky because there's so much, and rocky in a good sense, in that there's so much information, there's so much learning going on that it's really easy to forget things. And so just be honest about where you are. If you don't have that information yet, then it's okay to say that you don't have that information yet. And I think people will then say, okay, when can we expect this information? Then you can give them an answer. So there you've answered their expectation. And instead of feeling kind of unfulfilled of like, oh my gosh, no one knows what they're doing on the implementation team, you've actually answered that question and given them an expectation that can be reasonably fulfilled. But as I said, a migration is an all-encompassing project. And really, it involves the entire library and your community. It is a project of projects. So when you're thinking of platform selection, you have to think of the individual project teams that are going to be involved with this, because your implementation team can't do it all. You need individual project teams. How are you going to form them? What are their individual goals? How do the goals of each project team further the ultimate goal of getting to your new ILS? And that's really tricky because with the individual project teams, there might be some goals that are in conflict with each other. So you do need someone kind of in charge to figure that out. And each team will have its own risks as well. So the metadata people, maybe they can't map all of their metadata to the new system, or things are going to break. Dare I say boundwidths, which I think boundwidths are evil. I think maybe the empire created them. They never migrate, they break. So for example, Smith College has about 80,000 boundwidths. All of those are broken currently. So that's something to think about. With acquisitions, do you have to recreate your entire fund structure? Most likely, yes. That's a lot of work, right? So you really need to bring that out and gather information, especially once you know what system you're going to, because you'll better have information about the capabilities and limitations of that system. But of course, you want to communicate. How are the project teams going to communicate with each other? How are they going to communicate with the implementation team? What happens if they complete their project? Do they just go have a drink and say, we're done? You know, what is the handoff sequence? And how do they get things done? How do they work together in this migration? So it's really important to reaffirm the direction and intention. Now that you're getting more information, you can actually refine those communications. So it's no longer these blasts of we're going to migrate. You have to really tailor your communications for those different stakeholders and working groups. So let's break it down in terms of migration, pre-migration process. So you have a project plan, you have a communication plan. Yay, it's all good. We're done, right? No, you still have to continue to gather information because you are learning a language. This doesn't happen overnight. Maybe you want to talk to people who are working in the system that you've chosen. Maybe you want to see how it works. And then how does it work for your subject expertise? I'm a metadata librarian, so sorry, I'm always talking about metadata. I love data. So my question was, how can I do my job in Folio? The future of libraries is somewhat open. So yeah, and it turns out that I was chair of another committee after being chair of the merge group. And, we had to work that out based on the information that we had about the system. But also we needed to know who we were talking to. And by then, all of that was set up for us. We had our communication tool, which was Slack, which funny enough, UMass considers Slack a security risk. So sorry. Yeah, that's a risk that we did not see. So we couldn't use it on our desktops, we use it in our browser. But again, there was a response to that sudden, oh my gosh, what do we do? They're taking it off of our computers, the desktop version. So, the decision makers and actually the implementation group said, not to worry, here's the communication. We're going to work through it. We're going to train you on how to use the browser. So things like this will pop up, hopefully not that, but who knows what central IT does. Yeah, but you're really going to get into cleaning your data, figuring out these workflows, figuring out policies that make sense in your new language, because essentially you're becoming almost a different library. You're adopting sort of a new way of thinking, a new way of doing your work, as long as you can do your work in the new system. And that's why communication is part and parcel of this, to make sure that everyone stays on that path, which has a specific end in mind. The goal is to be able to do your job in your new system so that other people can find resources. So it's all about people. So that is the pre-migration process. And I've talked a lot about being goal-oriented. This is a project. There is a goal in mind. The shared expectations that you have help you with that goal. It really is the actions from the past that you've determined you can set and clarify goals for your project. Unity and direction and action all through communication, reaffirming what your expectations are, adaptability. Obviously, there's the Slack example, but I'm sure there'll be others. We were unable to migrate all of our orders. So we had to make a decision, only open orders or all of the orders. So we didn't want all of the closed and open, that would have been like 15, 20 years of closed orders. So we chose open orders and we had a cutoff point. So for metadata, the OPAC note would not migrate. So we had to know what to do with that information. There was nothing to map it to in Folio. Simplicity, really use the tools that make sense for your organization. For the 5 colleges, it's Google Drive and spreadsheets. So that worked for us because we were dealing with 5 different institutions that had 5 different cultures, 5 different deans, 5 ways of doing things. it's a miracle. We got the migration off and running and we still work together. So we are very different organizations. Smith College and Amherst, they're liberal arts and small. And then there's UMass, a 26-story tower of doom, you know, with 150 staff. You know, we work in committees, whereas Smith, they go and talk to their colleagues across the way. So very different cultures. So make it simple because people are doing this migration. And so that's extra work. You need to support them as much as you can. If they have to learn how to use JIRA, let me tell you, people aren't going to be happy with you. If you know anything about JIRA, it's horrible. Well, it's good, but it's a learning curve. So you really want to give them the support because they're going to be very busy. Typically in migrations, no one's doing your other work for you. You're doing your 100% your job. And oh, by the way, you're doing everything for the migration. That's been my experience. I don't agree with it, but I wish it would be different, but generally that's what happens. So prepare to be busy. Also transparent and honesty. You know, people are going to be tired. If you're asking your team to migrate during fiscal rollover, let me tell you, they're going to be very unhappy with you. And that's normal because their expectation is we have a job to do. Our job is to make sure fiscal rollover goes out without a hitch. Done. We need to complete all the orders, have this go out, and it's done. If you're asking them to do an entirely different job, how can they do that? So you really need to think about this, and that's the expectation that you set. Now, I've talked a lot about expectations, kind of, you know, basically kind of here and there, but I really haven't said these are the expectations you need. So let's take a look at expectations, what I like to refer to as procedural expectations. And these are maybe, they're not the easiest, but they're the most straightforward that a lot of people in migrations do. This is a map. It's actually a zoning map, a very old one, obviously, it's written by hand, but you can see it's color coded, you know, things are, you know, labeled, all of this. That's what you need to do for your migration. You have to have both a communication plan and a migration project plan. Who's in charge? Who's making the decisions? And if that person has something that happens to them, who's the backup? And you might say, oh, nothing will happen to this person. They're in, you know. So what happened to the 5 colleges, our lead, you know, the person who was making the decisions, his father became ill. He had to rush off to Chicago for 2 weeks at intervals, like over 3 months. And we were like, oh no, he's the only one who knows Olive. You know, what do we do? So, you know, we actually had a backup. So we had, you know, our old system, she retired. So Marianne, she also knew Olive. So we had a backup, but you do have to think about this. Who's making the decisions? If you have an obstacle, who do you go to? What are your milestones? What are the dates of those milestones? And are they a specific date? And what happens if you can't give the deliverables on that specific date? Remember, I kind of ended the Star Wars trilogy with failure. What happens if you fail to meet a date? So in the 5 colleges, we give kind of a timeline of date. It's not a particular date. It's going to happen in these 3 days to give us some leeway because things happen. And I mentioned before that you're doing this on top of your job. So you really have to respect that. You're kind of taking the goodwill of people and saying, we're going to give you more work. Thank you. Which, you know, shouldn't be the case, but it is. So you need to support your people as much as possible. And make sure you have the sequence of events, the expectation of the project and the project teams. Have it all lined out. It doesn't have to be a detailed novel, but it does have to list out all these elements to it. Project policies. So you don't want to be like the Empire or the Rebel Alliance. I mean, obviously, you're not going to instill fear for people who want to migrate to a new ILS. That would be horrible. But you also don't want to be, blowing up high level targets unless it's maybe Alma. But so Ex Libris will be, well, actually, it's Claravit that's going to come after you with that one. But you do need a set of expectations when you're on this project. What are your policies? How do people, interact with each other? And what you have to remember, it's not how you do your job. It's what your job is. And I know it's phrased a little hard here. Sorry. Yeah, that's probably, I should have changed this. But anyway, you really want to be able to do your job. What is the function? If you receive a book, can you receive a book in your new ILS? Then you have to learn how you do that. So what happens a lot of times is you say, well, I receive, what I do, step one is I click here, and then I click here, I add some information here, and I click maybe save and enter. That's going to be very different in the new system. So equating that with a new system is like saying direct translation of it's raining cats and dogs in French. The French are going to look at you and say, that doesn't make any sense. But it still is raining heavily. It's just a different way of doing it. So that's part of the expectations that you have to set people up. And this is where really your project teams come into play heavily, because this is, at least in the 5 colleges, it was the functional and knowledge experts that these were, formed the project teams. And this really helped people just with training, as well as creating new workflows, but making sure that what people did as part of their jobs, they were able to do in the new system, or there was some workaround. So if you're in Folio, we have lots of workarounds. So what does this mean? You're supporting people. It's all about people. Oh. This is a project of people. So with the process, and the process or procedural expectations, I really can't tell you what those are, unfortunately, because I don't know who's in charge. I don't know your milestones. I don't know your project teams. Haha, it's a way out for me. Oh, yay. She's talking about expectations, and now I'm telling you to do it all. But I think that's the hard part, because it is difficult to lay this all out. It takes a lot of work. And sometimes it's very easy to do a to-do list and then, but not have it in such a way that it gets into the detail that supports people in terms of expecting what, when, and where that they need to be on the project, when they need to be involved. So that project plan is really important. Maybe you've seen some Gantt charts. I love those. Those are really helpful. And having kind of a list of who's on the project teams, who's in charge, will help you with that. Because if someone says, all right, I have a problem, I don't know what to expect. Who do I talk to? You need to have that answer readily available for those people, and hence people. So this is the harder one. You have the procedural expectations, but then you have all of these expectations of how people are interacting with each other. No, it is working. Yeah. And so you want to create a shared set of expectations on the project. And from your input, you already know what some of those are. And hopefully you've flipped kind of the negative to the positive. So for example, the copy cataloger that I interviewed, who said, well, no one wants to talk to me. And that's going to be the same case for this upcoming migration. So we were like, no. I interviewed her in terms of what she did for her job. She does a lot of receiving. So I made sure what she did could be done in, I was about to say Alma, in Folio. You can do it in Alma too. And that it would make sense for her later on. And I noticed that she became engaged, and she started actually updating her own workflow guidelines. And I was like, that's a first, but I'll take it. That was really great. We had another person who's been with us for almost 40 years. She might retire soon. She works in end processing. Her fear was that she knew Olive. This was her wheelhouse. She kind of, her whole career was pretty much Olive. She felt like she was a knowledge expert in what she did. Going to a new system, no one would listen to her. You know, she wouldn't have that expertise anymore. Her fear was losing, not being seen as an expert, but also not being taken seriously in a way, because she would be fumbling. Like, what am I doing? I don't know. We flipped that narrative and said, we are going to support you. We're going to work with you in terms of learning this new system. And what we did after our migration is we had group sessions on what are your questions about this? Do the workflows that we put in place, do those make sense for you? And what do you want to add to these workflows? So that's a bit of kind of post-migration, but you can also do it leading up to the migration. So what does this have to do with shared expectations? The implementation team early on in the 5 colleges came up with the 5 colleges shared principles. And this is really a mix of kind of aspirational values as well as kind of ethics and project norms. You can see, you know, shared resource. We were on 5 different OLIFs plus an additional one for our repository. So it was very complex. We had one system coordinator who was trying to manage all of those individual databases and then the shared database. And yeah, he was tired. So we wanted really something that was easy. We wanted to go in just as a consortium, as one institution. So we wanted to align best practices. So as I said, we were 5 different institutions, 5 ways of doing things. Yeah, no one didn't order the same way. And you could tell the flavor. I was like, oh, it has that title. Oh, that's Sarah from Mount Holyoke. Yeah, she always has very long titles. I mean, I think they're mini novels in themselves. So we wanted to align that. Why? Because our discovery system is not only for each one of the schools, it's also for the consortium. We had, since the 1930s, every student can take a class at the other college. And so the resources are actually shared in between our 5 schools. I can walk up to Smith and use their electronic resources, which is very cool. So it's a really nice consortium. We also wanted to align and add additional functionality. So if there's any ERM librarians in the room, boy, yeah, Coral, spreadsheets, take your best pick, HLM, 360, there are a dozen tools to work with electronic resources, and none of them are really great. And so our poor, ERM librarian had to manage 4 or 5 different tools just to manage electronic resources and that whole workflow of getting it to the user. Yeah, that person was tired too. They're like, we need something centralized. And so Folio had that. So it's built in, well, sort of, it's getting there, built in with a workflow as well as HLM, because we're EBSCO. So HLM is in Folio as e-holdings. So that eliminated all of the tools that this person worked with. Communication. Now I've mentioned communication before. Yes, it was a little opaque apparently in the first migration. I know that because I interviewed people and they said, yeah, we don't know who was in charge really. I was like, what, really? So some people really didn't. So there was a concerted effort to really turn that narrative around so that people knew what to expect with communication. And everything we did was also transparent. I mentioned Google Drive. It had a mirror. You can actually find it. All of our documentation, for better or worse, is open and available to the public. So you can see all of this on our Google Drive. Last one is respect. Migrations are difficult because we're doing that on top of our own jobs. So people tend to get a little tired. They're doing a lot. sometimes things happen. You might not be able to migrate what you think you can migrate. There's fear of maybe losing your job or not being the expert that you were. So there's a lot of feelings and there's a lot of expectations. And so I think in the 5 College, we really just wanted to remember that we're all in this together and it's okay. So for us, failure was really, it wasn't failure. It was just saying we tried our hardest. And, you know, if we got our second best and it works, that's okay. Cool. Let's move on and have a potluck, you know? So, and they do love potlucks in Western Massachusetts. But, you know, I think I worked on another project many years ago, maybe 10 or 12. And here again, failure, you know, the principle was, you know, failure is just, you know, learning. It's a way to learn to do something new, think out of the box. Yes, we started the project, a digital repository migration. We did not meet our deadline because it was, well, it was a lot of work. That was not accepted. And we were like, oh, darn, you know? So we got marching orders to say, if you say you have a deadline, you must meet it no matter what. So we worked our tails off for that, you know, 60, 70 hours per week. So that environment was very different from the 5 Colleges. I prefer the 5 Colleges. That's why I'm there, you know. Yeah. But you have to think about that. So what does respect mean? Because this is all, you're creating a shared experience. You're going on this as a team, and it really has to center on people. No one's pressing a button to do this. You are taking a year or 2 out of your job to make sure that when the vendor comes in, they can actually press the button. But all of that work is you. And it's of value because I said this the other day to someone. What is the main real estate on your web page? Repeat the landing page for the library's web page. Search box. What is that search box? It is everything that you manage. It is not the liaisons, silly spring share libguides. It is not the hours. Sorry, I like to brat on the liaisons. It's always fun. Sorry if there are any liaisons here. I love you too. You know, it's our discovery system. This is the data and systems that we take care of. Right there, center stage. Your migration project deserves to be center stage. Often it is not. In my experience, it's not. It's something those technical service folks do on the side. That is ridiculous. What you do is of value. If that's not working, I mean, your library becomes a study space, a study hall, essentially. So, and that's going to be, Mike's going to talk about that as advocacy later on. This is a perfect time to advocate for your staff, to say there's a new expression, and I think it's Julia Grossman. It's an e-forum, I think next week, on slow librarianship. This is the perfect time to implement that with your migration, to really not only advocate for yourselves, but advocate for support in order to do this migration. Because if your boss or your implementation team is asking for 10% of your time to work on a migration, then you have the right to say, I'm going to stop 10% of my normal job in order to do this. Work-life balance. You don't want to be the empire and you don't want to be martyrs either. So let's go back then to expectations and clarifying needs and reasons. So this is the tricky one because it really is dependent on your organization. Do you view failure as really something that shouldn't be done, or is it okay? And so these core expectations, just like the slide I shared a little earlier, it had expectations and goals. Really, you need to clarify them. You know, you can get the code of ethics from Code for Lib, which is really good. They have a whole mechanism on how to report, you know, ethics violation. So what are your project norms? How do you want people to treat each other? Do you want them to respect each other? What happens if the deadline isn't met? You know, is that okay? But what do they do? So you don't want people to say, oh, I feel really bad about myself. You know, you don't want that. You want to support people. And this is done through communication, through input, and your guiding principles, but also your procedural expectations. And you can pick these like the 5 college shared principles I shared earlier. That was a mix of kind of a vision statement for the project as well as project norms. These are out there in the wild. ALA has a code of ethics. You might already have a code of ethics for managing your meetings. Just take from those, you know. But you want to make sure that you actually act in alignment with those, because if you don't, then the project, you might be successful, you might migrate, but your people probably won't have a great experience. And they'll probably disengage from your new ILS, which you don't want. So how do we put this all together? And this actually is the Boston Library when they were first building it. And it's the McKim building. So downtown Boston, really cool. Yeah. So let's put this all together. Process. You have to humanize the process. This doesn't happen without people. So make sure with your procedural expectations that you add points that support people in order to do this job. Statement of principles. You need this because what are your views on failure? What are your views on how people should relate to each other? You know, you don't want to be the, you know, aggressive military expansion, instilling fear and control onto others, right? But you also don't want martyrs. You want work-life balance so that people come to your new ILS, I mean, maybe fairly relaxed, but at least accepting that you're there. Because let me tell you, afterwards, it's more work. Sorry. Because you have to, you're actually going to be working in it. Then you're going to be revising workflows and moving forward in that new system as that develops. Project norms, code of ethics, this is kind of the people aspect of it. How do you want them to work together? So in addition to your project plan, you really need a communication plan and definitely mechanisms for feedback. Because if you don't have that, then you kind of stop listening to people. And you always have to be listening to people where they are, if they need additional support, and if everything is going well. So so this is why I use images instead of my own. But really you want to lead by example, because remember I said expectations are fulfilled if you have good reasons. And these are the past actions. So if you don't have some guidelines on how people should behave with each other and on the project, or any guidelines in terms of the procedure, people are going to be lost. So you really need all of that so that people have an example and then they can move forward and others can see, oh yeah, they're doing this. So the actions are predictable and therefore their expectations are fulfilled. Because ultimately it's all about you and how you're able to do your work. So take care of yourself in the migration, because if you don't, well, you'll just get really tired. So migrations is about people, not about really the data or the tools. And that's it. So I guess you want to be on the person lying down rather than the other one. I don't know why he's saying thank you either. So yeah, there you go.
We have about 15 minutes for questions. On the floor.
Oh, wow. That was like a miracle.
Welcome. Good morning, or almost afternoon, I should say. I have kind of the dubious honor of being on before lunch, so I hope I keep you awake and, and hungry. public speaking, I will tell you all in advance, is not my forte. So I'm up here kind of, Margaret did some arm twisting and I eventually said yes. And, and we'll get to the reason why she wanted me to come in a minute. I am currently the catalog manager and processing manager for the Cuyahoga County Library System. That is the large public library system here in Cuyahoga County. For those of you who are not familiar with this area, where everybody but the city of Cleveland and a few other independents in the Cleveland area. We serve 47 communities with 27 branches. So we are a single library system with lots of branches. We also, because we have the lovely Cleveland Public Library in our backyard with their vast array of collections, Cuyahoga County Public Library is a popular materials collection. We do not have a central library. We are concentrating on getting the newest, the latest, the most popular materials out to our public. So with that in mind, let's see if I can get this to work. So I asked my boss what he thought about migration. And this was his response, his advice: don't do it. And, the reason Daniel said that is because we're knee deep in a migration right now at the Cuyahoga County Public Library. We are, and I'll go from the bottom up here, at CCPL, we are moving from Sierra to Koha, and we're doing it right now. We are scheduled to go live in August. Our discovery layer, which is not on here, I didn't put it on there, but our discovery layer will be Aspen. We are also using the open source option for that. We currently use Encore, which is Triple I's discovery layer with Sierra. And we started this process roughly 18 months ago. And, when we started this process, they're like, oh yeah, Lori, you're going to do this because you've done this before. And I've done it actually twice before. So I was for a very long time at the Ingalls Library at the Cleveland Museum of Art. Hi, Kate and Ann. And we moved from Dynex to Aleph in 2007. Now, this was classic Dynex. This was not even Windows-based Dynex. This was, the black screen with the green blinking light. And they had the Dynex system for about 18 years at that point in time. So it was a major move. And the date 2007 is rather significant for the museum because in 2005, the museum went through or began a 10+ year renovation. And so they thought it was a really great time, since we would be closing things down and moving the library and doing all these things, to also migrate the catalog. So in addition to migrating the catalog, we went from an in-house classification system to Library of Congress. We RFID'd the entire collection, and we moved it not once, but twice into multiple storage areas. Some of it had to be identified and put in storage for as much as 2 years. So that was a huge undertaking during that time period. That was where I learned that, yes, there is too much. There is asking too much of somebody. The previous one, the one that I first cut my teeth doing this, was at Rush Reese Library at the University of Rochester. And I was there in 1996 when they moved from Notice to Voyager. Anybody remember Voyager? That's what Library of Congress is still using. At the time, Voyager was brand new and shiny. And it used things like, they came in and they went to train us and they talked about things like muff heads. And when we all looked around at each other and said, what the heck is that? And what they had taken is, the MARC format for holdings, and they took that acronym and actually gave it a name. And we had to learn all about that. Notice, like Dynex, was a blinking light on a black screen, and it was Windows-based. So one of the things that we did was we had to go around and install Solitaire. Does anybody remember doing this? To teach people how to use a mouse, because we had people who did not know how to use a mouse in 1996. So that's who I am. I've been in the biz for quite a long time, as you can see. That's what my boss calls me, a unicorn. I'm a cataloger mostly. I've worked in academic, special, and public libraries. I've been in the business since I was 16. I've had my degree since 1994. In 1996, like I said, when I went to Rochester, they were hot to trot to have somebody new there, but they, didn't know because nobody had ever really done a migration before in 1996. We were just coming out of the first generation of ILS catalogs. So they didn't totally know what they were looking for. And what they realized is they looked at me and said, hey, you're going to try to figure this out. And it turns out, quite fortunate for them, that I actually have a talent for this. So in part of my shtick here is that I'm going to tell you what I think that talent is, or what I've been told that talent is, because this is an important talent to cultivate in your staff. And it's an important talent to have on your team in a migration. You need somebody that can take the complex process of cataloging or acquisitions or circulation or all of the above and describe that process and understand it without the jargon to people who may not understand it. And it is sort of like speaking a foreign language, like we said earlier, like learning a new language, but you got to be able to fully understand where that data is coming from, where that data's got to go to, and how to describe that in a way that is understandable to other people. You also have to have somebody who can see the really big picture about what's going on in the library, who's using it, how they're using it, what their expectations are, and also be able to take that and take it down to very small detail within the context of a bibliographic record or a bit of data in a patron record or whatever. And I've been told that it's referred to as spatial thinking, but my dad said it was like thinking in 3D. Told me I should have been an architect. But you need people who can make those connections between themselves, their jobs, how they do it, how it affects other people in the organization, and how it ultimately affects what we tend to call in public libraries, customers, who's using the catalog. And those are both internal and external customers. Go ahead. So what do I mean exactly by reimagining your library? What does that even mean? It kind of means this. So when you go through a migration, you are trying to take your current policies, procedures, and you're trying to marry them with your aspirations or the wants out of this migration. And you're trying to shoehorn all that in together into a new system and make it all work. And so your policies and procedures in your current system, they're designed around a particular workflow with particular limitations to that system. The system that you're moving to has its own workflow and its own set of limitations. So it is very often like trying to shove a square peg through a round hole. Your basic processes remain the same. You're going to be selecting, you're going to be purchasing, you're going to be receiving, you're going to be cataloging, you're going to be processing in some manner, you're going to be circulating items. But the underlying business process, the data structure, the programs that control that all change. And where it's highly controlled, the easiest data you actually have to migrate is your bibliographic data, because that is highly controlled. Your acquisitions data, not so much. Serials data. Anybody here a serials librarian and done a migration? It doesn't migrate, does it? Serials data doesn't go. Your circulation data seems pretty straightforward. We all circ. There are issues you will butt up against with migrating that data. So your patron data, your circ data, your open orders, all of that has to be rethought and reimagined. Just something, as simple as a circ rule. You may be moving from one system who bases their circ rule on that type of patron to another system that bases a circ rule, say, on a type of object. And that's a very different concept. And you have to rethink how you're going to make that work in that new system. So as technical service staff, we have all created workflow that exploits or mitigates limitations in your systems. And, you know, we do it to meet our own library's needs. And you know, as much as people like to talk about libraries pretty much doing the same thing, we're all very unique entities. So these are all exposed when you migrate, and you have to reconsider all of them. And you have to think about, why do you do something the way you do? Is there another way to do it? Do we even need to do it? You know, these are all questions you need to ask. And there are going to be things that you're going to realize that you can let go, or that you created, and it's this horrible, awkward workflow anyway, and you'll be happy to let go. One that comes to mind within our, you know, current migration and at CCPL is we have book discussion sets where we created this really arcane system of hot and warm barcodes, and trying to explain that to a vendor blew their mind. So if we realized if we couldn't explain it in a way that was meaningful to the vendor, then it probably was something that we needed to look at differently and think about differently. Next. The next thing I'm going to talk about is garbage in and garbage out. So this is a little bit about managing expectations. When you go shopping for a new system, which we did in early 2022, you tend to kick off that with being very aspirational. Let's completely change everything we do. And you know, it tends to stay that way until you actually start picking a system and you start migrating. Once you pick a system and you start migrating and you get kind of into the mid-migration, you start seeing the flaws. You start seeing the things that aren't going to work, or the things where your data is too thin, or the things where the process is completely different. And so you spend oodles of time in this mid process, which my two colleagues that I'm here with, Christy and Grace, are furiously doing, trying to clean up that data. You know, you may find things like, oh, you never purged patrons for the last 20 years, or you've never, you know, you never archived orders, or you have things that are just hanging out here that you know, nobody ever saw, but so you didn't think it was a problem. Yeah, all of a sudden those things are problems. So you spend a lot of time in mid-migration tearing your hair out, thinking you're never going to make it. You've got all this stuff you got to do in front of you. And you start bargaining. And so when you get late in the migration, you kind of have to switch, and that you have to kind of get into the frame of mind of getting it done and fixing it later. You get introduced to lovely features on your new system that you're really interested in doing, but you can't think about them right now because it means rethinking so many other things. Or if you had known about them 4 months ago, you would have done something different with that data. So those are sort of the phases that I've been through, and that is consistent. You know, with 2 of the migrations, I wasn't there when UVAR actually selected Voyager, but I was certainly for the art museum, and that is sort of the phase. You have this huge shopping list, you want, and vendors know it, and vendors show you the absolute maximum that a system can do, but that doesn't work if you don't have what's behind that. So yes, once you get down into the late migration, it gets down to what I refer to as brass tacks, and you got to just get it done and figure it out later. So when we talk about migration and you talk about live dates, know that there will be, for the next 18 months or more following that, cleanup. There will be the fallout from doing this. There will be the things that you know before it goes live that you're going to have to deal with later. But then there's also going to be a pile of things that show itself as soon as you turn that switch on that you're going to have to clean up. And it can get very stressful. As we heard earlier, it can get very stressful. And yes, I would have to say, you know, in my 3rd experience with this has never been part of my job. It's always been on top of my job. So you do have to kind of balance that. You know, if you've got a really open executive committee who wants to put some money behind it, yes, you can hire temporaries in, but you got to make sure that whatever you've hired people in to do, they understand the ramifications of what they're doing, because they can screw things up unintentionally, with the best of intentions, screw things up. So that's kind of what I mean about reimagining your library and garbage in and garbage out. So these are my 3 sort of overarching principles with library migration. Begin with the end in mind. What is your most important goal? What are the problems that you're trying to solve with migration? What services or improvements are you trying to gain? And then identify your problem areas and be honest about what those problem areas are. I mean, if you know that you haven't cleaned out something in your data file for years and years and years, just be honest about it. Be realistic. Is there time to tackle this in-house? Is it something that I could outsource to a vendor and have them clean up? Is it something the vendor that's helping me with the migration can clean up for me? Just be very honest, and then be flexible. No matter how carefully you screen, no matter how good your data is, no matter how you are managing expectations, both internally and externally, there is always going to be something that doesn't work the way you want to, or works the way they told you it did, but it doesn't do what you actually thought it would do. And this is the thing I've always said, there will always be things that you love about your new system, things that you hate about your new system, and no matter how you try, it won't work the same as it did in your old system. So, just be aware those things are going to happen. And that is something within the context of my own people that I kind of bring home a lot with them. It's sort of a reassurance, because people do get very panicked about, I can't click here and it's not gonna do that anymore. And you have to, kind of reassure people that yes, things will change. How you do your job is gonna change. No matter what you do, it's gonna change. But there's gonna be something you like about it. There's gonna be something you hate about it, but there's also gonna be something you like about it. Let's see. So I was asked to specifically talk about publics and what I think is unique about the public library experience with migration. For one thing, we still have lots of stuff. People come to us for things, lots of things. We have lots of e-resources too, but we still manage tangible things. And a lot of our tangible things in the world of WEMI are the same work. So, we might have the same title in 5 different formats. So we have a wide variety of media, increasingly popular within the public library realm, or library of things. You want to borrow a lawnmower, a bicycle, a toy, those things are things all libraries are circulating these days. So we have lots of unusual things in the catalog, and it's brought in a visual component and a visual expectation into the catalog that you want to be able to meet when you're out there shopping. So we got stuff. Then there's people, and people have unique needs. Unlike an academic library, which even in something as large as 5 colleges, this is sort of a closed system. It's within the confines of that university. And within a special library, like when I was at the art museum, it's a closed garden. The public library never is. It's out there and it's for everybody to see. And if you're a public library, particularly in the state of Ohio, you serve the entire state, not just your county. You have to take people in from all over the state. So your patron databases tend to be larger. They tend to have kind of weird, unique needs to it. We do lots of patron initiatives where we want to go out and register school children at schools, or come to Tri-C and register kids here at Tri-C to be library users. And then we want to track this stuff. So there's some unusual junk in that data. There's an expectation of having reading histories available. If you're a user, you want to see what you've read in the past. And that brings up some privacy issues that are a little unique to publics. There's also a desire to share some of that reading history. And opinions about books. So there's a large social network connection to the catalog these days on the public side. So there's a big premium on the patron service area in the public discovery layer. And with, like I said, an emphasis on visual components and a lot of third-party integrations. So what I mean by that is that, you know, we have our traditional bib record, but then we also have novelists or syndetics that kind of gets married with that bib record, and it can tell you read-alikes and other books within the series, and you can rank how you feel about this book, and you can sometimes even place reviews depending on the services that you're using. So there's a lot of emphasis on that right now in the public library catalog. Lastly, what publics have, which I think make us a little unique and challenging, is traffic. We cannot close to migrate. We have to be open. We can't close down. We can't say, sorry, too bad, so sad, we're going to be closed for the next month while we migrate our catalog. We have to remain open. So not just, you know, in the branches, the whole system and the catalog. We will have one day in August where we will be doing Circ offline, and then that following Monday we will be live. So we have to have a lot of things in place and a lot of testing in the background. With this particular migration, we have a full test database running that we will be working with and trying to break and trying to, you know, for as much as we can, troubleshoot before it goes out public. And we are working with our own data in this test database. Mind you, it's now what, 6 months old, 5 months old. Yeah, but it is our own data. So, you know, we can see how our own data behaves in this. We can make changes up until the point we release this and it goes live. Now, one of the other aspects that you have to think about in terms of libraries and public libraries in particular, especially one that serves a large population like we do, we have very high turnover rate on items. Our turnover rate on some items are double digit. That book will go out within, you know, it's a brand new book. Think Prince Harry, Spare. That book will go out, you know, a dozen times or more within the calendar year. So, and it has to, we float 100% of our collection, which a lot of libraries do nowadays, if you're in a multi-branch system. That book has to be able to go from branch to branch to branch to branch, wherever the demand is, wherever that next hold is. So, you know, within the context of my own system, go next. Like I said, we are moving from Sierra to Koha. You know, we did 7 million circulations last year with and handled somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 million holds. So that's a lot of traffic going through a system. And we are going in our migration between Sierra and Koha, we are going from a internally hosted system to an externally hosted system. Bywater, and Bywater is going to host our Koha instance. We have, in terms of patrons, we have 450,000 patrons. And so when you put 7 million circs on 450,000 patrons, that's a lot of circ per patron. So that's what I mean by traffic. It's very load heavy on servers. It's very load heavy on the system. So, you know, we're going to spend a lot of time trying to break Koha before we go live. And we do call it that, breaking. So when this is how we began the search, all of these have changed or been a little different. And because I've worked in much smaller places, we aren't necessarily, don't have necessarily the committee structure that other of you will experience in larger, you know, places like Ohio State or the 5 colleges. We don't have that depth of personnel. I mean, there's, you know, 85 of us in admin at Cuyahoga County Public Library, and that's it. So, and only a small portion of that 85 are actually working on this project. So when we started this process, we had identified that our issues were public services. We didn't like what the catalog looked like for our users. We didn't like how the catalog, how Sierra particularly worked for our circulation staff. Now there's 850 people that work for Cuyahoga County Public Library. 550 of those people are in direct public service. So when you realize that your public service catalog is not really working well for them and it's not working, it's no longer viable. So that was the motivation for our move. It wasn't necessarily anything that was going to change in technical services, though it is, but it wasn't necessarily to improve my life or the life of our acquisitions people. It was more about trying to make the 550 people who work in public services jobs easier. So that was the motivation for doing it. We sent out a request for information in the spring of 2022. And as we all know, if you've been following Marshall Breeding or just, looking at Library Journal, there aren't very many vendors in the field these days, and they tend to specialize. You would not get many public libraries, except maybe somebody the caliber of Cleveland Public that would want to take on Folio, or I was going to say Olive, but it's not Olive, it's Alma. Similarly in public libraries, it tends to be things like Circe Dynex, Sierra, Polaris, and now there's Koha. And Koha is an open source software product. It came out of New Zealand. Bywater Enterprises is managing it for us. They are a company that actually their whole modus operandi is to provide customer service for implementations of Koha. So they will help us implement it, they will help us host it, they will help us configure it for go live, and we can pay them for development, and we own our own data. So this was why we went with Koha, if anybody care to know. We did look at other systems. We reviewed them, we ranked them. We had a committee formed for this across a wide swath of folks in the county library system. We were very heavy on circulation staff and public service staff because we really were trying to make their jobs better. And we were very surprised when it came back that overwhelmingly that people wanted Koha and Aspen. So we made our selection in the fall of 2022. We signed the contract in November. Bywater did a site visit in December, and we kicked the project off in January. We will be going through training for all of our staff in June and July. And like I said, the go live is in August. So we're heavily in the weeds. And yes, I'm definitely at the stage where what can I set aside for post go live? So that's pretty much it for me. I want to thank you all for inviting me to come. I am open for any questions you may have. Although my mind is kind of